There is a specific kind of silence that only lives in the high country. It isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of something waiting. Out here, the wind doesn't just blow. It judges. It strips the paint off the houses and lies off a man's soul until there is nothing left but the plain, hard truth. Before we ride into the heart of this, do me a favor. If these kinds of stories with grit, heart, and the smell of wood smoke, mean something to you, hit that like button. It tells the system that there are still people who value the old ways of storytelling. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and stay close. We're building a community here for the quiet ones. Welcome to the channel. If you've been here before, you know we don't tell stories about heroes in white hats who ride off into a perfect sunset. We tell stories about the gray areas, the moments where a man has to decide if he's going to keep his head down and survive, or stand up and lose everything for a stranger. We tell stories for the folks who know that life is mostly made of dust and difficult choices. Think about the heaviest thing you've ever had to carry. Not a physical weight. I'm talking about a secret or a regret. The kind of thing that makes you wake up at 3 a.m. with your heart hammering against your ribs like a bird in a cage. Now, imagine someone looking you in the eye and offering to take that weight from you. Would you let them? Or are you so used to the burden that you've forgotten how to stand up straight without it? In today's story, we meet a man named Elias Thorne. He's a man who has spent 50 years learning that the world doesn't owe you a thing, not even a kind word. But when he finds a woman broken on the edge of his land, he discovers that some wounds don't bleed red. They bleed the color of a past that refuses to stay buried. When she tells him, "Don't look at my hands," she isn't asking for privacy. She's trying to save him from a horror of what she's seen. Because out here, once you know a thing, you can't unknow it. And once you see a crime, the law says you're either a witness or an accomplice. I want to hear from you. Stop for a second, take a breath, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are right now? And where in this big world are you listening from? It helps me realize that even though the land is wide, we're all sitting around the same fire tonight. Now, settle in. Grab your coffee. Let it sit long enough to get that bite, and listen close. Because the road ahead is rough. And it starts with a woman who thought she could hide the truth behind a pair of tattered gloves. The frost was still thick on the pump handle when Elias Thorne stepped out onto the porch. It was October in the Wyoming Territory, the kind of cold that didn't just nip at your skin. It went looking for your marrow. Elias was 62 years old, and his joints felt every degree of it. He didn't complain. The land didn't care for complaints, and neither did the cattle. He was heading for the south fence line, where the timber met the scrub. He'd seen a break in the wire the evening before, and out here, a hole in the fence was an invitation for trouble. He saddled his horse, a blue roan named Ghost who was as tired of the wind as Elias was, and rode out. He found her a mile from the house. At first, he thought it was a down calf, just a heap of gray and brown in the dead grass. But Ghost shied, ears pinning back, and that was when Elias saw the movement, a hand, or what looked like one, reaching out to clutch a fence post. Elias dismounted, his boots crunching on the frozen earth. He moved slow. Out here, anything that moved fast was usually trying to kill you, or was dying. As he got closer, the shape resolved into a woman. She was wearing a dress that might have been fine once, but was now a map of briars and mud. She was huddled against the post, her head down, her breath coming in ragged, shallow hitches. "Steady now," Elias said. His voice was like gravel shifting in a pan. "I ain't a wolf." She didn't look up. Instead, she tucked her arms deeper into the folds of her skirt. She was shaking, but it wasn't just a cold. It was the kind of vibration you see in a horse that's been run until his heart is ready to burst. "You're on Thorne land," Elias said, keeping his distance. "My house is a mile back. There's a fire and a pot of beans. I don't care where you came from, but you stay out here much longer. The crows are going to start taking an interest." Finally, she lifted her head. She was young, maybe 25, though the terror in her eyes made her look ancient. Her face was pale, save for a dark bruise that ran along her jawline like a shadow. "I can't," she whispered. Her voice was thin, almost transparent. "Can't what?" "I can't go back." "I ain't asking you to go back," Elias said. "I'm asking you to get inside." He reached out a hand to help her up. It was a simple gesture, a neighborly one. But as he reached, she let out a sound, not a scream, but a sharp, panicked gasp, and scrambled backward, her back hitting the fence wire. The barbs tore at her shoulder, but she didn't seem to feel it. She was focused entirely on his hand. "Don't," she said, her voice sharpening with panic. "Don't look at my hands. Please, just don't look." Elias paused. He'd seen a lot of things in 60 years. He'd seen men lose their minds to the heat, and women lose their souls to loneliness. He'd seen the aftermath of raids and the results of bad luck, but he'd never seen someone terrified of their own hands. She was wearing gloves. They were heavy, work-hardened leather, far too big for her. They looked like they'd been stolen from a man's saddlebag. They were stained with something dark and slick. "I won't look at anything you don't want me to see," Elias said, his voice lowering into a soothing cadence. "But you're bleeding through your dress, and your breath is rattling. Let's get you to the ghost." It took another 10 minutes to get her onto the horse. She moved like her bones were made of glass. Every time her hands, those oversized, stained gloves, braced against the saddle, she winced, her eyes fluttering with pain. Elias led the roan back to the ranch, walking the whole way, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't see anyone. No riders. No dust. Just the empty, indifferent sky. But Elias knew. You didn't find a woman like that in the middle of nowhere unless someone had put her there, or someone was making her run. Inside the cabin, the heat from the wood stove hit them like a physical blow. Elias helped her into his own chair, the one by the window. He poured a cup of coffee, black and bitter, and set it on the small table beside her. "Drink," he said. She stared at the cup. Her hand stayed buried in her lap, those heavy gloves looking like clubs at the end of her slim arms. She wouldn't touch the coffee. "Name's Elias," he said, sat across from her at the table. He began to clean his spectacles, a nervous habit he'd had since his wife passed. "The roan is Ghost. The dog under the porch is Barnum. He don't bite unless you're a coyote or a tax collector." A tiny flicker of something passed over her face. Not a smile, but a recognition of humor. "Sarah," she whispered. "Well, Sarah, you're safe here. For now. But that shoulder needs tending, and I suspect you haven't eaten since the moon was full." He stood up and reached for a tin of salve and some clean linen he kept in a chest. When he turned back, Sarah had tried to take a sip of the coffee, but the heavy gloves were clumsy. As he watched, her grip failed. The tin cup hit the floor with a hollow clatter, splashing hot liquid across her skirt. "I'm sorry," she gasped, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." She reached down instinctively to clean it, and that was when Elias saw it. The glove on her right hand had slipped. The leather was stiff with dried blood, and as it shifted, it dragged against her skin. She let out a cry of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound that made Elias's stomach turn. "Sarah, give me the hands," Elias said. It wasn't a request this time. It was a command. "No, don't look. Please, Elias, you don't want to see." He said no one would ever want to touch them again if they knew. "Who said that?" Elias asked, stepping closer. "Mr. Gaunt." The name hit Elias like a bucket of ice water. Silas Gaunt. He was the man who owned the silver mine 3 towns over. A man who sat in a big house with marble floors while men died in the dark to fill his pockets. He was a man of standing. A man of law. Elias didn't wait for her permission. He reached down and gently, firmly, took hold of her wrists. "Don't," she sobbed, turning her face away. "Please don't." Elias ignored the plea. He had to know. He gripped the cuff of the right glove. It was stuck. The blood had acted like glue, bonding the leather to the flesh. He moved to the basin, brought over a bowl of warm water, and began to soak the leather. He worked with the patience of a man who had spent his life untangling knots. Slowly, the leather softened. Slowly, it began to slide. Elias pulled the glove away. And then Elias Thorne, a man who had survived the Civil War and the Great Blizzard of '88, froze. He felt the air leave his lungs. His heart skipped a beat, then labored to start again. Sarah's hand wasn't just injured. It had been branded, deep into the palm of her hand. The skin had been burned away in a jagged, deliberate shape. It was a mark of ownership. A G intertwined with serpent. It was Gaunt's personal seal. But it wasn't just a brand. The fingers had been crushed, the joints bent at unnatural angles, as if they'd been caught in a press. And around the wrist, the skin had been flayed away in a perfect circle, as if she'd been chained by something that didn't just hold her, it ate her. Elias looked at the other hand. It was the same. A matching set of horrors. He said I was his property, Sarah whispered, her voice dead. He said if I ran, I'd have to carry his name wherever I went. He said no man would ever hold a hand that belonged to Silas Gaunt. Elias felt a cold, hard rage begin to settle in his chest. It wasn't the hot rage of a young man. It was a heavy, iron rage of an old man who realized the world was worse than he'd thought. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. He just picked up the clean linen, dipped in the water, and began to wash the wounds. He moved with a tenderness that seemed impossible for hands as rough as his. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly. "It stopped hurting 2 days ago," she said. "Now it just feels empty." Elias finished the bandaging. He tucked her into the small bed in the corner of the cabin, the one his daughter used to sleep in. He sat by the stove and watched the door. He didn't have to wait long. Around midnight, the sound of hooves carried across the flats. Not one horse. 4, maybe 5. They weren't hiding. They were riding with the confidence of men who knew the law was on their side, because they bought the men who wrote it. Elias stood up. He didn't reach for his pistol. He reached for the long-barreled Sharps rifle that hung over the mantel. He stepped out onto the porch. The riders pulled up at the gate. The man in the lead was wearing a fine wool coat and a hat that cost more than Elias's cabin. He was middle-aged, with a face that was handsome in the way a polished stone is handsome, cold and unyielding. "Thorne," the man called out. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. "I believe you have something of mine." "I got a lot of things, Gaunt." Elias called back. "I got a rusted plow, a blind dog, and a whole lot of peace and quiet. I don't see your name on any of it." Gaunt smiled. It was a thin, predatory expression. "The girl, she's a thief. She took something valuable from my house. I have the warrant right here, signed by the circuit judge." He held up a piece of paper. In the moonlight, it looked like a white flag, but Elias knew it was a death sentence. "She didn't steal nothing but her own life," Elias said. He shifted the Sharps. The click of the hammer cocking was the only sound in the night. It was a loud sound, a final sound. "Careful, Thorne," one of the riders said, shifting his hand toward his holster. "That's a United States Marshal's warrant." "I don't care if it's signed by God Almighty," Elias said. "You see, I saw her hands." The line went quiet. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Gaunt's smile faded. His eyes narrowed. "What happens in my house is my business. Old man, she's a servant. She signed a contract. She's debt bonded. You didn't bond her, Gaunt. You broke her. And out here, there's a law older than your judges. It's the law of the land. And the land says that when a predator comes to a man's door, that man has a right to stop it. You're one man," Gaunt said, his voice dropping an octave. "I have 5. You'll be dead before you can reload that cannon." "Maybe," Elias said, "but I'm 62. I've lived my life. You, Gaunt? You got a lot of silver left to spend. You want to bet your life that I miss with the first shot." Elias leveled the rifle. He didn't aim at the riders. He aimed straight at Gaunt's chest. Silence stretched out. It was that Judge Wind again, picking up, whistling through the porch rails. Gaunt looked at the rifle. He looked at the steady hands of the man holding it. He saw the truth in Elias's eyes. Elias wasn't afraid to die. And a man who isn't afraid to die is the most dangerous thing in the West. "This isn't over," Gaunt said, his voice tight. "I'll have the sheriff here by morning. I'll have your ranch. Thorne, I'll burn this shack to the ground." "You can try," Elias said, "but the sun's coming up in a few hours. And once the folks in town see what you did to that girl's hands, once they see that brand, I don't think silver is going to be enough to keep them quiet. You might own the law, Gaunt, but you don't own the people's stomachs. And seeing a woman branded like a steer, that's a hard thing to swallow." Gaunt stared at him. He looked at the cabin window, where a single lamp flickered. He realized for the first time that his respectability was a thin veil. Without a word, Gaunt turned his horse. "We're leaving," he snapped at his men. "Sir," one of them asked. "I said we're leaving." They rode off into the dark, the sound of their hooves fading until there was nothing left but the wind. Elias didn't move for a long time. He stayed on that porch until the first sliver of gray broke the horizon. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline leaving him. He looked down at his own palms, calloused, scarred, but clean. He went back inside. Sarah was awake. She was sitting up in the bed, her bandaged hands resting on the quilt. She looked at him, and for the first time, the terror was gone. It had been replaced by a heavy, somber realization. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked. "Maybe," Elias said, setting the rifle back in its place. "But not today, and today is all we got." He walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't grab her hands. He didn't try to force a connection. He just sat there, a witness to her survival. "He was right about one thing," Sarah said, looking at the white linen. "No one will ever want to hold these hands again." Elias reached out. He didn't hesitate. He took her bandaged hand in his. He held it gently, his thumb tracing the edge of the linen. "You're wrong, Sarah," he said. "The marks show what he did. But the fact that you're still here, that shows who you are. And that's a person worth holding on to." For the first time, Sarah didn't pull away. She leaned her head against his shoulder and wept, not the silent, shaking sobs of a victim, but the loud, cleansing tears of a woman who was finally, truly free. The sun came up over the Wyoming flats, painting the world in shades of gold and iron. It wasn't a perfect world. There was still a man with silver and a judge with a pen out there. But for one morning, on a small ranch at the edge of the timber, the truth had been told. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't pick up a gun. It's picking up a hand that the rest of the world has discarded. Elias Thorne didn't save Sarah because he was a hero. He saved her because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't. That's the choice we all face, isn't it? When we see the brand on someone's soul, do we look away because it's none of our business? Or do we stand on the porch and face the dark? If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us keep the fire burning here. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up for someone when it cost you something? I'd like to read your stories. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your heart steady. This is Cowboy Stories. We'll see you down the trail.